So you all had a survey where you answered some questions for me about yourself. That's how I know things, like a lot of you are taking biochem and physics, but also about aspects of the immune system and immunology. And one of the things that you had to answer was you had to talk to somebody who was not a scientist, and you had to ask them about how the immune system worked to understand what was going on. So I have two basic things that we should talk about here. And the biggest thing I want to know is, how'd they do? Did you like their answers? Did you not like their answers? Did you feel like they knew what was going on? Did you feel like they were clueless? Like, how'd it go? Yeah, Lexi.
I was slightly disturbed, especially at my family members' answers. I was like, how do you not know this?
Okay, so what types of things were they saying that made you slightly disturbed?
I wrote them down. I remember. Well, my mom was like, why are you asking me this? Like, she kept beating me up. Like, question. I was like, okay, I'm trying to remember exactly. I wrote it down. I don't remember.
Okay. All right. What else we got? Yep, Tony. Okay. A lot of people got a lot of information about antibodies. Yeah, Paula.
My friend's like a computer science, so he like compared it to a firewall. So that was like, okay.
Okay. All right. What'd you come up with, Lexi?
Oh, my sister said something like, oh, you have AIDS if you don't have antibodies. It was something really like just very not. I was like, why? I don't.
Okay.
I was like,
Okay. Yeah, Mark.
Someone told me that people get vaccines so that your body can fight off dead infections, so that they know how to fight off living infections.
Okay. So, yeah, Vanessa.
Well, I had like two people are really into music, and also the one person's also very much into political science. So I had those kind of people. They didn't have science background. They were saying that like the body sends a bunch of antibodies to attack infections, which I thought was interesting.
Okay. So would you say that they knew what was going on, or that they didn't know what was going on?
They sort of had an idea generally.
Okay. Yep, Olivia.
They like a general idea, but not really like the detailed version of what actually happens.
Okay. If you were to compare how they would answer if you asked them about like how the kidneys worked or how the brain works, do you think they did better or worse?
I think the same in terms of how much they get right, but different in terms of like what aspects they get right, if that makes sense.
Okay. Yeah, Tony.
I feel like people like have more of a general understanding of the immune system better than like a kidney or something, because like even in cartoons, I know that there's always that one episode where people shrink down. I don't know.
Okay. Any other thoughts on this one? Yes, Mark.
I feel like I don't know enough about the immune system.
Okay. So in some ways it's almost like I would say there may be three levels. Like the general public knowledge, the like science student before they've taken immunology knowledge, and the science student after. So you're at the middle. So I mention this because it actually is going to tell us a few important things about immunology. When people actually try to think historically about the first time somebody wrote about the immune system and the first recorded information of immunology, this is usually what they come up with. This is actually usually the quote they come to. You will notice that this is from Thucydides in the history of the Peloponnesian War in about 430 BC. You will also realize from that Thucydides did not have the prereq of Bio 250. Nor was there much sophisticated medical or molecular biologic information available at that time. However, Thucydides said, though many lay unburied, birds and beasts would not touch them or died after tasting them. The bodies of dying men lay one upon the other. But those who had recovered from the disease had now no fear for themselves, for the same man was never attacked twice, never at least fatally. There are similar writings in both Sanskrit and Chinese around the same time, but I can't read those. So we go with this one. And so people have been making observations about the immune system for a really long time. And even people without a lot of sophisticated science knowledge have a little bit of an idea about what's going on, as you saw. It might not have been perfect, but they have sort of this general idea. Whereas if you ask them about some other body systems, they'd be like, the who? And a big part of this is because we all have bodies, and we all get sick, and we all have immune systems. And so we have personal experience with a lot of these matters. This is going to become really critical for us. One other thing I forgot to mention in my introductory stuff. I post slides generally before I go to sleep the night before. I usually don't post slides before the first day. I post them afterwards because I kind of jump around and I don't know which ones I'm going to end up using. And so I'll post these slides after today, and from today on, I'll have posted the slides before. When people start to think about, well, okay, this is a nice observation, but what about experiments? When did people really start doing immunology experiments? There's also a pretty clear answer to what that is. The first experiment that was ever done was by this guy, Edward Jenner. He did the experiment in 1796, and he published his paper on it in 1798. The story goes that Jenner observed the lovely skin of the milkmaids, realized that they were getting cowpox from working with cows, guessed that this might protect them from getting smallpox, and so he took some of the cowpox lesion from someone's arm and injected it into a boy, and then injected him with smallpox. This is an 8-year-old boy named James Phipps. The second person he did this to was his own son. Obviously would not happen today, but showed that the child was protected. And so he was able to experimentally induce protection. We actually now know that there are multiple reasons why this story is false, but we'll go with it for now. And so this, again, this is an experiment that was done in 1796. It's pretty old. You don't tend to hear a lot about experiments that were done in those kinds of times in necessarily all of your different science classes. And you might say, okay, that's nice. That's a nice old-timey experiment she's telling us about. This protocol led to the eradication of smallpox. So this was a disease that people were terrified of. If you read old literature, you will hear about blah, 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 who in their pockmarked face. That was because it left anybody who lived through it with scars. So most people got it. A third of them died. The rest of them had scars all over. Just in the 20th century, it led to 300 million deaths. Led to deaths of all sorts of famous people. It was bad. If you read the details of how somebody dies of smallpox, it is gory. And this was a terrifying disease. And we got to the point where on December 9th, 1979, this disease was eradicated from the planet. And this is based on an experiment that was done in 1796. So these are legit experiments that actually had a really big impact. In fact, if we look at sort of all the ways that immunology has contributed, and we look at just vaccines, just the number of diseases that were, or cases of disease that were prevented using vaccines, we see massive changes in the number of these cases. So, for example, diphtheria went from 175,000 per year to 0 per year because of this vaccine, and on and on and on. So if you think about the number of lives saved, team immunology wins for most useful. But then when you start adding in things like amount of healthcare costs averted, and amount of days of work people didn't miss, and things like that, you can see a huge impact economically of this field. If you actually then start to add in agricultural vaccines and the things that we're able to do in terms of ag, immunology wins by far in terms of kind of contributions. And all of this is based on, in some cases, some pretty old stuff. If you look at the Nobel Prizes, this is a list of Nobel Prizes. It goes only to 2016 that were awarded for discoveries in immunology. It is 20% of all Nobel Prizes in medicine. And so again, this is a field that is making a lot of really big strides. And it's something that people can kind of describe to you, at least a little. But there's another question that we might want to think about when we think about the immune system. Is it actually important to your life? Does it matter? And so one of the things I asked you guys was to tell me about some reasons why you might go to the doctor, or things that could happen in your life that involve the immune system. So what types of things can you come up with that are ways that the immune system could be important in your life? Yeah, Mark?
Like autoimmune diseases.
Okay. I will point out a couple of you guys used autoimmune diseases in like sketchy ways in answering your questions. You haven't had immunology yet, so like, who cares? But just FYI, some of you are going to have to like twist your definition a little. Let's see what else we got. Yeah. Okay, so we've got details about organ transplant. And ways that we manipulate the immune system post-transplant, absolutely. What else? Yeah, Lexi. Okay, so we've got infection. Yep, Mark. Allergies. Yes, Ashley. Asthma. Let's see. Yeah, Nick. Chronic inflammation. What else? Yeah, Tom.
Vaccines.
Anything else? Yeah. So any big infectious disease. Let's see. Yes, Paula. Yeah, largely because you want to get your travel vaccine. Yep. So cancer. Yeah, Tony. Okay. Yeah, Mark.
No, I was going to say rabies, but then I realized that was also a vaccine.
Rabies is either a vaccine or an infection. You kind of hope it's a vaccine and not an infection. So you can see that there are a lot of pretty important aspects of healthcare that you can see that are relating to vaccines or relating to immunology. In fact, you have named, usually what happens here is students name a whole bunch of like really specific infections and things, and then we classify them, and we're like, look, some of these are all autoimmune diseases, and some of these are all transplant issues, and you guys just named the categories instead of naming the specific things, so I don't have to tell you categories. Apparently the thing I'm learning today is that both here and in my DSEM, people are answering like much higher than I'm expecting, so that's good. That bodes well for my semester. But is it important?
I think so.
Okay, you think so? Yeah? So let me just give you a couple reasons why it might be. So some people could be like, nah. I mean, like, it's about infectious disease, right? And infectious disease was, a big killer in the past, in 1900, but now most of our causes of death are really non-infectious disease. So who cares about immunology? In fact, it's funny because it's old-timey. And this poor Surgeon General, everyone quotes him and makes fun of. This is like this quote that people just use to make fun of. Where, the Surgeon General in 1967 is like, we've closed the book on infectious disease. We're done with that now. We're moving into the era of chronic disease entirely. This is the United States. If you looked all around the rest of the world, you'd see a lot more infectious disease. So if we care about the rest of the world, that's why it's important. But B, these are the top 10 leading causes of death worldwide. You can see that some of them are infectious. However, if we actually try to figure out which ones have some part with your immune system playing a role, specifically with inflammation and chronic inflammation playing a role, I can take credit for ischemic heart disease, stroke, COPD, lower resp infections, lung cancer, the cancers, HIV, diarrhea, diabetes, and hypertension. Someday I'm going to figure out how to get road traffic accidents too. But in fact, the vast majority of the causes of death worldwide all have one of these playing some sort of role. And so, in fact, this is pretty important. And you might say, well, okay, that's really great and all, but I don't care about that. I just want to make money. Just FYI, this is a very short list of antibodies that are now given in the clinic as drugs. And again, like I said, this is a short list of antibodies that people can use. And this is an old slide. This is 2019 or 2009 to 2014. These are all monoclonals, and you can see that, for example, in 2014, $62 billion of sales were on monoclonal antibody drugs. Most of some of these others, so the vaccines, and some therapeutic proteins as well, are immune-based. And so if you think about what the pharma companies are doing, they're moving completely into immunologic-based drugs. And so that's another reason why a lot of this is really important. And so even if you decide you never want to care about this ever again, and you just want to, go make money or go treat patients, this is probably going to matter quite a bit to you. So, if you were going to tell me in like a sentence how the immune system worked, what would you tell me? How does it work? How does this go? Yes, Tony. Okay, so your body has special systems to fight off foreign invaders. So I'm going to write that down because that's a good one. Okay, so do we like this definition? Do we think we need to make changes? Do we want to, anything you want me to tweak, or do you want to go with that? Yeah, Nick. Okay. Okay. So Nick wants to know, well, there's also something that goes on in terms of handling your own cells. So that should be a question toward our definition here. Yeah, Mark.
Even though the systems are specialized, they're also imperfect.
Okay. What else we got? Yeah, Paula.
The immune system also works collectively with the other systems. It's all like a web rather than a chain.
Okay.
Or it could be a chain if you focus on one thing specifically.
Okay. Yep, Vanessa.
There's a way to work with residential microbes.
Okay. Okay, yep, Emily. Okay. Yeah, Stephanie.
A specific and non-specific response, and you can build up a tolerance to a thing.
Okay. Yeah, Mark.
It has a good
So you can see that it may be a little hard to encompass everything in one sentence. Huh? A little bit. So you guys actually have hit on some of the points that I was going to be making. So that's good, and I will sort of skip through some of them. But there are other ones that I do want to point out to you. So if we just start with the idea of special systems to fight off foreign invaders, and we can compare that to, this is a textbook I used to use. This is the first sentence of the textbook. And it says, immunology is a study of physiological mechanisms that humans and other animals use to defend their bodies from invasion by other organisms. Pretty similar. I have a couple questions for you. So first of all, neither of those definitions address where is the immune system?
in the body.
In the body, yeah. Is it like an organ? So here it's special systems. Here it's physiological mechanisms. Is it an organ? Is it a cell? Is it a protein? Is what?
Systems by definition are multiple organs.
And so this is one thing to start thinking about. With a lot of things, if you think about the nervous system, you tend to have some organs that, you're thinking about with the ones. But when you start to think about the immune system, it's really decentralized. And so we're going to have to think about this at a lot of different levels. There are going to be times where we're talking about things at the level of proteins. There are going to be times when we're talking about the level of cells. There are going to be times when we're talking about this sort of at a level of more like anatomy. And we have to be able to switch between those levels because, in fact, the immune system is acting at all of those levels. Realistically, the immune system ought to act any place where you could get infected. And you can get infected at all the places. And so you kind of need to have some types of defenses happening in a lot of different places. So this definition mentions we want to stop invasion from other organisms. And Tony also mentioned that we want to get rid of foreign invaders. So in both cases, we see the use of the word invader, which makes my life a little complicated. In past years, these are a couple of other definitions students have come up with. So it's the responsibility of the immune system to differentiate between self and other. We're working against outside invaders. We're trying to act against foreign matter. So okay. So now I'm going to propose a problem to you on the next slide. And you need to tell me if the immune system cares about this problem or not. So remember, we're going to think about foreign stuff. Foreign matter, protecting you against other organisms. Ready? Cows are other organisms. Wheat is another organism. Tomatoes are. Lettuce. I don't remember what's on that burger. All of those things are other organisms. So does your immune system protect you from these?
Yeah.
So does your immune system do anything to any of those, to anything that you're seeing here? No. Maybe. But so realistically, you do not make a massive immune response to beef when you eat it. And so your immune system isn't just responding to any old organism that is not you. Because if it was, we couldn't eat. And as you can imagine, evolutionarily, that would be a pretty bad system. So we have to have all of these subtleties. We have to figure out things like resident microbes. We have to figure out a lot of different sort of small issues, because evolutionarily, having an immune system that just really looked at self versus non-self, which is the way sometimes people think about it, would never work. There's another way that evolutionarily this would be a big problem. This is the one that nobody ever thinks about. So, this fetus is half foreign. If you just put in a kidney from this woman's partner into her, she would reject that kidney. Yet, she can have a half foreign organism in her body for 9 months without her immune system rejecting it. You can also imagine that evolution-wise, if we evolved so that this was not allowed, that would not work so well for evolution. And so, in fact, the immunology of pregnancy immunology is its whole own field. It's related to transplant. And trying to think about how these types of things work. So it's not even, is there detection of a foreign organism, or is it self versus non-self? In fact, having these types of subtleties becomes really important for the system to fully understand what's going on. Yeah?
Do these technically count as invaders? Like, they're more like immigrants, aren't they?
That's actually the funny thing, is that you guys happen to all use the word invader, which has like intent on it. And I'm like, that's a bigger argument for a whole other time. Because there are some immunologists that actually would tell you that that's part of it. But yeah, so whether or not these count as invaders, that is true. Invader makes my life a little tricky here. But they are certainly other organisms they are foreign matter or foreign organisms inside of you. And so you can see that this becomes really, really tricky really quickly. It's not just sort of this simple, oh, we're going to learn about how our immune system detects the foreign things. Because it doesn't just detect foreign things, it's actually making some really subtle distinctions with different things that you might come across. So I want to go straight to this. So you're already here. But let me tell you some reasons why I think immunology is awesome. First of all, it's really vital to your health and your protection against pathogens. When this system malfunctions, you have some pretty severe illness, and it's a pretty fascinating subject. It's also a subject where we have this really long history, and so we know a lot of information. There's also a ton that we don't know. Almost every day in class, I will tell you something. I'm like, and that's the limit of our knowledge on that. Or there are certainly going to be times where you guys are going to ask how something works, and I'll be like, oh no, we haven't figured that out. No one's figured out how to do that experiment yet. And so we are going to actually see kind of science in action because there is so much that's unknown. We're going to see some really, really critically important biological principles. Many of the techniques that use the immune system are important in other parts of biology. So again, if you never do immunology again, you're still probably going to come across this stuff with techniques. We've got lots of cool interconnected parts. It's going to integrate all the different types of biology you've taken in all your different bio classes. That's why I asked you about your other bio classes, so I can sort of pull on different information that everybody knows. But immunology is hard. I'm not trying to sugarcoat things. There are a couple things I want you to hopefully realize. It's a complicated subject. There's a lot that we don't know, and we're going to try to be pulling together information from different parts of biology. When you choose to teach an immunology class, one of the things you end up having to spend a bunch of time thinking about is the prereqs. I know some people who teach their undergrad immunology class with prereqs of genetics, molecular biology, cell biology, and biochem. And so because we're going to pull a lot of different information. I have done this here at Drew for a while. I know what types of courses you have. I only expect you to have 250. But know that you all are going to be bringing in different pieces of biology to our discussions. And so sometimes that can feel weird. It's okay. I'm expecting you to know 250, and that's it. But that's something that sometimes throws people off. The immune system is full of all these interconnected parts. So a real view of the immune system looks kind of like this. So now I want you to think about how you would take that image and put it on a syllabus that looks like this in a line. So we have this huge number of interconnected parts, and it's a huge challenge both for me in teaching this and for you in learning this. On Wednesday, I'm kind of going to do like a cast of characters. And it's going to be kind of like going through a bunch of different cell types and organs and telling you what they are. And to me, it's like one of the least interesting classes of the whole semester. But you need to know who some of the parts are so that when I zoom in on any particular cell type, and I tell you, well, it's turned on by this interaction with this other guy, you've at least heard of that other guy. And so you have to at least know who some of the players are, and then I'm going to be zooming in. But realize that we're trying to take a very interconnected system and smash it into a line. And it is really difficult. But there are other reasons why people sometimes mock the immunologists a little bit. We love our acronyms. Immunology has a level of acronyms that a lot of people find a little bit off-putting, and a level of weird nomenclature. Be aware of that right away. Be aware that at the beginning, sometimes it is going to feel like you are in a foreign language class. This is why I think it is very important for you to do the reading before class. Because that way, you will have encountered the terms before I say them. You won't necessarily have understood everything, you won't have put it all together, but you'll have some familiarity with all of those diverse terms before I say them. And that's one reason why I have been told by a lot of people that the videos really help, is so that you can go back and sort of pull things together. One of the other big reasons for this is that immunology is so old. There are things that were named in the 1700s or 1800s. And that name doesn't totally fit with things that we know now, but it just stuck. And so sometimes we're going to talk about the names of things, and you're going to be like, the who? The what? And I'll be like, well, in 1940. And so as you're thinking about things, realize that that's going to be one of the big sort of issues here. We're going to get past it, but that's a thing that people sort of joke about as why immunology is hard, is because of all the weird words. And so just be aware those words are coming and think about how you're studying to sort of deal with that type of thing. One thing I also sort of forgot to mention when I was talking about the history before, if you were a person who was interested in the human body and medicine in the 1800s, you wanted to study like parts of the human body in the lab, like live. Could you study human neurons? No, you were not going to get live brain cells, right? Could you do a lot of fancy work on the kidney? No. What could you do? Blood. You could pull blood out of your patient. And so blood cells have been characterized and described for a really long time and looked at under the microscope. And people know a lot about blood cells before they knew anything about any other types of cells. And so again, the names for them are like wacky because someone named them in 18 whatever. Again, this is more of something you need to be aware of going into learning this material. I will also tell you that it's something that I think a lot more immunologists should think about, because we do most of our work on the immune cells of the blood. There are tons of immune cells that live in the wall of your GI tract. We don't tend to like take out people's GI tract, degrade the wall, pull the cells out, and see what they do. And so maybe we're actually getting something that's a little biased. And sometimes when we look at tissue responses, they're a little different than the blood responses, but we do blood because it's easy. So be aware of the nomenclature and the acronyms. We like the Greek alphabet a lot. I will put on Moodle actually a page with the Greek alphabet and how to type the letters because they come up so often. I did not understand that being in a sorority was going to be helpful for being an immunologist, but I got my Greek letters down. Just because something has an alpha in it does not mean it's related to the other thing that has an alpha in it. It's just because we're not very creative. The other thing that's a little bit tricky is that sometimes immunology seems counterintuitive. It's not, but you have some ideas about how biology works, and maybe you have come up with some shortcuts in your head. Some of what you're going to learn is going to really challenge those shortcuts and make you really think through how basic biology works. That's why I mentioned some of us are going to redefine autoimmune disease. Okay, that's not going to be just a general thing. Sometimes we're going to have to redefine how we understand how things work. There is one day of class that I will demo to you right now. I'm going to stand here and talk. And this process is random. One student. When you say random, you don't actually mean random, do you? Yes, I mean random. But it's not really random. Yes, actually it is. But, there's like a process. It's not random. No, it's random. And we're going to go back and forth like that for a while. Because there are some places where, I had one student last year, who sat in the back, sat right where Sydney is sitting, who had dramatic facial expressions all the time. Whenever that student's mind was blown, I knew it. And there were definitely places where there was lots of mind-blowing going on. So again, be aware of that, and be aware that sometimes that might be a little bit uncomfortable. To realize that, oh, this is sort of challenging how I previously thought certain parts of biology works. And that's okay, and one of the reasons I love immunology is because it makes you really understand some of the other parts of biology well. But it just might be a little painful from time to time. So I also want to remind you a couple of other things. So this is, to me, a sort of critical piece of how I think about the immune system. Some of this has to do with the types of experiments I care about in my lab, the types of experiments I've done in the past, but this is a big way that I think about this. Realize that immunity emerges during evolution largely because of the challenge posed by infectious agents. And so sometimes something makes sense in terms of it evolved to protect you against infectious agents, and it doesn't make sense for any other reason. Sometime I was at this conference, and someone was talking about how much of a selective force microbes were compared to how much of a selective force saber-toothed tigers were. And it's a little bit of a silly comparison, but if we think about selective forces, microbes are much more of a selective force than it was, say, asthma or, say, diabetes in the past. And so, in fact, sometimes our immune system is set up in a way that works really well for the pathogens and really poorly for some other stuff. And that's okay, because it works so well for the pathogens, and the pathogens are such a big problem that if all of our children died when they were 1, then that would be bad. So our immune system works to save them all and has some bad side effects down the road. And evolution proceeds like a tinkerer during millions of years, slowly modifying products, retouching, cutting, lengthening, using all opportunities to transform and create. Different tinkerers with the same problem will reach different solutions. So the point here is, again, we're solving a hard problem with the tools of evolution. And so sometimes, again, you're going to be like, no, it should work this way. And the response is, well, how would you evolve something that works this way? You can't. That magic wand, maybe sure. But no, this is how evolution answers this question. And so sometimes you'll see things that seem a little odd, and it's because, remember, we are looking at things that are happening as a result of infectious agents. Couple things I want to remind you about pathogens. If the whole point of this immune system is to evolve in response to pathogens, then we should probably have a couple things in mind about pathogens. Whether we are thinking of them like Sun Tzu or whether we are thinking about them like Green Day. We need to know a little bit about that enemy. So please remember that we have a few different types of microbes that we're going to be thinking about here. We may be thinking about viruses, we may be thinking about bacteria, we may be thinking about fungi, and we may be thinking about parasites, which may be unicellular or multicellular, like worms and things like that. These are going to lead to infection. Infection is a situation where the microbe is established and growing. That has nothing to do with whether or not the host is harmed. It is just whether or not the microbes are inside you. So all of those microbes that are helping you digest things in your GI tract have infected you, but they are not causing disease. Those are all infections. Disease is only when we have damage to the host. And there often are multiple steps along the process of an infection leading to a disease. So just because you are exposed to a microbe does not mean that you are going to be infected, and just because you're infected does not mean you're going to get sick. In fact, one of the big determinants is whether or not there's an immune response that stops the microbe from colonizing or stops it from causing damage. And so you need to be aware that infection is the first step, but is not the whole part of the process. Ideally, your immune system may be stopping things before we get to the point of disease after that infection. So there are a few challenges that I just want to point out with microbes. And this one I want to do in a slightly different order than the slides are in here. Yes, Mark?
So if damage to the host is caused when the immune system is fighting off the infection, like by the immune system itself, does that still count as disease or is that still infection?
That is officially known as immunopathology, and people will debate that answers to your question. And so I call it immunopathology. All right, so if we think about some of those different microbes that I mentioned to you, viruses, bacteria, fungi, and different types of parasites, there are a couple things I want you to think about. First of all, we can think about replication rate. Last year, Dr. Dunaway decided he was going to sit in and audit this class. He came for the first day, and then he never came again. When I mentioned this point about replication rate, there was funniness that happened in the class at that particular moment. Because I asked, how long does it take for a bacterial cell to replicate? What's the generation time of a bacterial cell? And what's the generation time of a human cell? And he was appalled that everyone didn't have the answer like that. Just appalled. So what do we think in terms of generation time of a bacterial cell? How long does it take for a bacterial cell to replicate? How long does it take for one of your cells to replicate? For what? Bacteria or human? The fastest a human cell can replicate is once every 24 hours. And that is its fastest. Okay? What about bacteria? Yeah.
It could be a range of many different things, just depending on the bacteria. It could take 8 years, or it could take 8 minutes.
Yeah. So usually we think about something like the E. coli replication rate as being 20 minutes. So your cell can make another copy of itself once every 24 hours. E. coli cells can make another copy of themselves once every 20 minutes. So what that means is that if we try to think about, we put E. coli next to some of your cells and some nutrients, who's going to win in replication? E. coli, always. The microbes can always replicate you out of house and home. They always are going to win. And so some of the defenses that we're going to have are really dependent, or are really based upon that, are really based upon just knocking down numbers. Because if we were to allow full-on replication, if we were to allow microbes to replicate at their full rate, we would never win. And so that's one of the reasons why things like non-specific defenses are really good, because they're just pushing numbers down until we can have a specific defense that can make a difference. And so that replication rate you want to think about is going to be really key. We can also think about things like, are the pathogens different from our cells? Somehow our cells have to recognize that is E. coli, this is skin, and be able to know the difference. And so there are big challenges in thinking about how we see responses to different pathogens based on how different they are from our cells. So if you were to think about different types of microbes, different types of microbial pathogens, which ones are sort of pretty similar to our cells? Any that might be a problem here? Yeah? Why would fungi be a problem? Yeah. So fungi are eukaryotes, so they're probably going to be a lot harder and going to probably require something different than, say, bacteria that are very different from us. Anything else that's a problem? Yeah? Yeast cells are fungi. Yeah. Okay, but yes, they would be a problem. Anything else? Yeah, Tony? Yeah, all of our eukaryotic parasites. So, malaria and Giardia and all those things are all eukaryotic. And so that's going to be really, really different than how we would deal with some type of bacteria. Viruses use host cell products. So again, we're going to start to have some challenges. And so thinking about, well, what actually is different about this? And how in the world could our immune system realize that this pathogen is different in order to make a response is going to be very key. Some pathogens mutate really fast. And so having a fixed target is going to be hard because there's so much variation. We also have to think about where microbes are found. So there are some microbes that are found outside of cells, some are in cytoplasm, and some are in cellular compartments. And so in fact, we have to have immune responses that do surveillance in all three of those places. We have to have immune responses outside of cells, we have to have immune responses in the cytoplasm, we have to have immune responses in compartments. And the other thing is we have to think about the size of the pathogen relative to the size of human cells. So a lot of times people think a lot about how their immune system works and they imagine Pac-Man. For those of you who are not children in the 80s, Pac-Man was this video game where there was this yellow guy and he ate stuff. Anyway, everything's about Pac-Man, right? Your cells just go and eat all the bad guys. So this is a parasitic worm called Ascaris. It came out of a person's GI tract. This is somebody's hands holding a big mass of it that came out of someone's GI tract. I tell you that so that you can think about the scale of those worms. Do you think you have a cell in your body that can eat that? No, not at all. And so what you can see is that phagocytosis clearly is not enough here. And you can realize that things like size actually will be part of what determines what kind of immune response we have to make against different microbes. Because some of them can be combated really easily because they're small, and others are going to take a whole different process because they are so giant. So the one last thing I just want to tell you about is that if you were to make a list of all the organisms that could be infected by pathogens, you'd get a pretty long list. And so if you were to think about all the organisms that can have defense, you get a pretty long list. We are largely going to be focusing on the vertebrate immune system. I'm not going to say a whole lot about immunology in plants or in invertebrates or things like that. I'm really going to be focused on vertebrates. So just to be aware of that. I mean, yeah, the other stuff's cool. I would love to talk about it, but no, not time for everything. So we're going to do the cast of characters, the who's who, on Wednesday, and I will see you guys then.